In this video, we're going to show you how to install the exhaust manifold on your Nissan Versa, located on the back side of your engine. Underneath your vehicle, you're going to find this cross brace right here. And we're going to use our 12mm deep socket to remove the 4 nuts supporting this here, and then remove this bracket. Now, we did spray it down with some rust penetrant. You want to go ahead and do that before you start this job. And remove that bracket. Set it aside. We want to go ahead and remove our oxygen sensor from the CAT system itself. Now there's a connector right here on our left-hand side. There's going to be a little push button or tab on the side. You want to push that in and then disconnect the connector. Now we'll go ahead and remove this here. Now we're going to use a 22mm open end wrench. They have a O2 sensor socket you can use. It has a split in it. We're going to try our wrench here and loosen this. Now you might have to use some rust penetrant on this here and or some additional heat to go ahead and loosen this and remove it. You want to be careful if you're using heat. You don't want to ruin the sensor. It tends to be a good practice when you're replacing the catalytic converter to replace your oxygen sensor anyways, but if it's not bad and you don't have to replace it, just be careful removing it and set that aside. Now up underneath here, close to the engine, there's the flange right here for the CAT, and there are 2 16mm nuts, one here, one on the other side, so we want to go ahead, loosen and remove those. We're going to use an extension and our 16mm deep socket and come up on the back side here from underneath, loosen and remove these. Now we did soak these in rust penetrant. You can see that dripping off of there. Highly recommended when you're doing a job like this here so you don't break these studs off. Go ahead and remove the nuts and the springs and set those aside. Now we have our CAT here and it comes back to our flange and then it meets up with our muffler flange right here. Using a 14mm socket, we're going to go ahead and loosen and remove the 2 bolts. We did spray these down with some rust penetrant. Now before that pops out completely, I'm going to go ahead and break the other one free. And we'll go ahead and work that one out. Now when this bolt comes out with the spring, be prepared. This whole CAT pipe can drop down on you, so just kind of support that when doing this. Now we just want to go ahead and work this CAT system down off of the engine. Rotate that out and drop that down. Now in order to access our exhaust manifold, there's going to be a heat shield over the top side of it. And there's generally 4 bolts that hold this heat shield. It's one here, and then 2 down below. All right, so let's go ahead and try and gain access to these 4. We're going to remove that. Once that's off, there are 5 bolts that hold the exhaust manifold to the cylinder head. There's one up top, one underneath, there's one in the center, another one underneath, and then up here in this ear. We'll have to go ahead and loosen and remove the nuts securing those. I'm going to disconnect our battery here. We're going to start using a 10mm. I want to go ahead and loosen the nut on this side here. Pop that off. Do the same on the positive side here. And we just switched over to a regular wrench. Gives us a little more clearance in there. Using our 13mm socket and extension, we're going to go down in the front side of the battery and we want to loosen the hold down clamp. And you're going to reach down inside there and pull out the bolt and the clamp. And there's your bolt and your clamp. Once you remove that clamp down below, grab that battery, pull it out, and set it aside. The reason why we did that is we want to go ahead and gain access to our air filter box. We're going to go ahead and remove this and this air intake tube. That's going to allow us some better access onto the back side of the engine. So here you have your mass airflow sensor. There's a little spring tab or clip on the bottom. I'm going to press that in and pull up on this connector. Might be able to use a screwdriver to gently wiggle up on that there to pry that up. Put that aside. Next, we want to go ahead and focus on, we have our clamp right here holding the intake tube to the throttle body, as well as this bolt here securing this component. Let's go ahead and loosen those bolts. Using a 10mm, we're just going to use our quarter inch ratchet here with our socket. I'm going to loosen that. On this clamp right here, that is an 8mm. So let's switch over to our 8mm socket. We're going to use a little extension here to make access a little bit easier. The air intake tube that goes into the bottom of the air box, it runs up underneath and it comes up to this portion right here. Now what you can do is use a flathead screwdriver, and what we're going to do is go ahead and separate this here. I'm going to pop that off. That should allow you to go ahead and pop this unit up and out. Now we want to go ahead and access our O2 sensor. We're going to come along on the back side here. Now it's a very tight fit. That's why we're going to take you on in there, show you where everything is. If you come on in, you can see there's a blue wire right there. That goes down to the O2 sensor. Now that wire comes up, and there is a connector end right up in there. I want to go ahead and disconnect that connector that has that green and red wire going to it, and then once that is disconnected, we're going to come back out, follow that blue wire down, and that's going to take us to the O2 sensor that is down underneath. You see the O2 sensor right there going into the exhaust manifold. We're then going to go ahead, loosen, and remove that. Now we didn't unthread our oxygen sensor at this time. We just disconnected the electrical connector. What we want to do next is we're going to remove our heat shield here. Now there is going to be 4 10mm bolts securing it. There's one up top here. There's one directly over on the passenger side, just out of camera angle. And then on the bottom side here, there is a 10mm bolt right here. And then there's one over on the other side there. We did spray it down with some rust penetrant, so we're going to use our 10mm socket and our ratchet, and we want to go ahead, loosen, and remove these. Now the bolts on the passenger side heat shield, we're going to go around on the passenger side of the engine, reach down, and get our ratchet on there. Now we did use a little bit of heat on this side here. We just used a little propane torch to heat up this bolt here because they're pretty rusted in there. All right, that one there is pretty much ready to fall out. There we go. Next one I want to get to is down underneath here, and is the 4th bolt. It is the last one we need to get to. So let's go ahead and get to that. Now that we have the hardware released, we want to go ahead and raise up our heat shield here. And we're going to take our heat shield, we're going to go ahead and lift this up. We're just going to kind of pry this up. And the purpose of this here is we want to go ahead and gain access to the bolts on the top portion of the manifold. So we just have to lift up our heat shield enough to do so. Let's see if we can actually pull this off and over. I'm just going to leave it on the side. Let's go ahead and gain access to those bolts on the manifold. Now from underneath the vehicle, we're going to use our 12mm deep socket extension and ratchet here. Now at this point, you can go ahead and access all 5 of these studs and nuts from the bottom side. Going to use our extension, deep socket, and our ratchet. I'm just going to go ahead and loosen all of these nuts here, remove them, and then we'll go ahead and lower the manifold down. And at this point here, we're able to spin this out. In our case here, the stud came out with the nut. Let's go ahead and remove the other 4. Now on the center bolt here, we used a gear wrench to get up inside. It gave us this tool gave us the right amount of clearance and room to go ahead and work. Now underneath here we have the exhaust manifold. We have this bracket right here supporting it. It's 2 16mm bolts, one that goes to the manifold, one that comes down and bolts to the side of the transmission itself. Now what we're going to do is we're going to remove the bracket altogether. Even if we remove this bolt here, we wouldn't have enough room to pull the exhaust manifold down and out. So we have to go ahead and remove the bracket. Let's go ahead and get the upper bolt first. Now we're going to use a wrench on the bottom bolt for clearance purposes here. Now we're going to work this down. Remember, you have the oxygen sensor attached to it. Slide this out. You want to be careful not to hit that O2 sensor on anything. And just work this down and out. And as you work this out, work the flange down first. Twist out the manifold. Now that we have the exhaust manifold removed, you want to reach up and remove the manifold gasket itself. Drop that out, set that aside. Your next step, what we want to do is go ahead and clean the cylinder head surface. We can see some debris and things like that around where the gasket was. So what we like to do is take a small block, be something like this here, just a block of wood that's smooth, and we're gonna wrap it in 400 grit sandpaper. And we wanna go ahead and just sand the block. Now I wanna basically just clean the surface there where the gasket is to be going. If you're doing this, good idea to be wearing safety glasses. I'm going to continue to do this until we can clean up that surface there. The reason why we're using a block with the sandpaper is that this is an aluminum head, and if you use anything other, you can actually put grooves in the cylinder, and you don't want to do that. You want to make sure that that mating surface is nice and smooth for that replacement gasket. Once you've sanded the ports here on the cylinder head, put some solvent on a rag and just go ahead, wipe down the surface. It's always best to go ahead and have a new gasket for this here. Now we have our oxygen sensor here that we need to remove from our old exhaust manifold. You're gonna need a thin wall socket here, and this is a O2 sensor. It has a split in here, so you can slide this over the wire. The reason why you need a thin wall is that the factory manifold has this heat shield around the sensor. Now we did spray this down with some rust penetrant. Let that soak for a little bit. Now I want to go ahead and loosen this. Remove that. You got to be careful with the sensor. You can't bang it. You can ruin that sensor. However, if your vehicle has high mileage, probably a good time to go ahead and replace this anyways. Now you want to go ahead and install the O2 sensor into the flange right here. You don't want to put the flat part of the manifold into the vise. You don't want to deform that there, but what you can do is use this side here just to gently hold this in place. Now what we're going to do is we're going to install the O2 sensor. I'm going to apply just a little dab of anti-seize compound on the threads. Do not get it on the sensor. Notice how I'm spinning the wire with the O2 sensor. You don't want that to bind up and break the wires inside. Let's go ahead and tighten that down. I'm going to make sure that's in there snug. If you're using a new O2 sensor, it does have a crush washer on there. You want to make sure that that is fully seated. Now on our old manifold, we have the two downpipe studs here. These do thread into nuts on the back side. So what we're going to try and do is remove these. Be careful, don't put your pliers on the threads. And ours is stuck in there a little bit. So we want to spray down the threaded side on the other side with some rust penetrant. If required, we'll then use heat to go ahead and loosen these. I'm going to check the bottom one here. All right, let's go ahead and spray those down and work on those. And we did choose to use some heat on this here. There we go. And all we're going to do is swap this over, put it into the new manifold. We'll clean up the threads on the wire wheel machine. Make sure that our new nuts or nuts will thread on here nice and easy. Let's go ahead and do the same for the bottom stud, and we'll swap them over. Next step, install the studs that we just removed from the other manifold into the new manifold. We did run this through the wire wheel machine. You can go ahead and use a bristle brush, whatever, clean up the threads the best you can. Now positioning. You want to make sure that where the O2 sensor is located, there's only one hole here for a stud to go into. On the top, well, we got two. This one here on the right side is for the bracket that supports the manifold. This side here is for the stud diagonal across the pipe itself. So stud here, stud here. Very important. Otherwise, if you mess that up, it's going to be a pain in the butt later on once you have it on the vehicle. I'm going to put some anti-seize compound on there. Thread that in. I'm just going to tighten that down with some locking pliers. Same thing here. Boom, get that in. All right, let's go ahead and install the manifold and our gasket.
Now you want to go ahead and feed your manifold gasket up into place.
Our next step is to feed the manifold up and in. Set that in place. We're going to reach up there and install the studs, nuts, everything there that we need to secure this. So just going to get everything started. All right, our next step is to go ahead and just snug the hardware down. We're not going to tighten anything yet. I'm using my gear wrench on that middle stud here. I'm going to thread that in. That'll pretty much hold the manifold flush while I go ahead and snug down the other four. The reason why you don't want to tighten everything down right from the get-go is that there is a particular torque sequence that you need to tighten these down in to properly seat the gasket and make sure that you don't warp anything. Okay, all 5 of the nuts and studs are snug down. Let's go ahead and torque those in a position. Now our torquing sequence is first going to be to 15 foot-pounds for all 5 of the bolts. Then we're going to do a second round to 25 foot-pounds. Now the pattern, there's 5 bolts, but you're going to torque 8 times. Okay, so this is very specific. You're going to start with the very top center bolt. That is number 1. Number 2, the lower right. Number 3, lower left. Number 4, upper right. Number 5, upper left. Then we come back to the top center. We torque that to 15 again. That's number 6. Number 7 is the lower right. Retorque that to 15. Lower left, which is the 8th time, or 8th torque time, and retorque to 15. Let's go ahead and do it. And our 5th bolt is the upper left.
Now that we've torqued these down to 15 foot-pounds, we now need to go back to the top center, the lower right, and the lower left. We're gonna finalize with that 15 foot-pounds then. We're gonna repeat that same process to 25 foot-pounds on the next round. Going to install our bracket here for the manifolds. So I'm going to line that up. Just going to hold that in place. I'm going to get a lower bolt lined up into the transmission here. And I'm just going to get that started a couple threads. Now I did clean up the threads and I put some anti-seize compound on there in case this ever needs to come apart again. Tighten down our bracket here. I want to make sure that's good and snug. I'm going to tighten down the bolt on the manifold flange here. Same thing on this one. Once that bottoms out, give it a good half a turn on that, make sure it's snug. And on the cat pipe that has the flange, it bolts up to the muffler area or the mid pipe. You want to go ahead and install the donut here. Press that on. Let's go ahead and install this component here. So feed the catalytic converter flange up and in. And what we want to do is feed this up to the manifold. I'm going to line that up top. Get the flange lined up with those studs. And go ahead and feed that on. It's going to take a little bit of work. There we go. All right, we made it up top. Now we're going to come back to the mid pipe with the flange here. Now in the mid pipe section here, let's go ahead and feed our spring bolts through. And once we get these started, we're going to go ahead and tighten these down. You can just use your ratchet and tighten these down. So we want to go ahead and push this flange up onto our cat, or onto our manifold itself. Push that up, and you want to get one of those nuts started on there. Might be a little easier said than done. We'll try the other side. Okay, we got that one on. What I may do is put a pole jack or put a jack underneath the exhaust to help push that up for me to line that up, so I don't have to hold the system with one hand and try and get that nut on with the other. Now when I do this here, I want to be careful. We don't want to damage the pipe. We just want to go ahead and push this up. And jack it up and push that pipe on there. There we go. We can go ahead and release the jack, lower that down, and we'll get rid of the jack. Now when you're tightening down these nuts here, there are stoppers on these studs. So just tighten down these two nuts. There it is, it just bottomed out. Make sure this one is bottomed out as well. There you go. So that flange is now completed. Install your O2 sensor. I put a little anti-seize compound on the threads here. Go ahead and line that up. I'm going to thread that in. Now when you're threading this in, you want to go ahead and rotate the wires with it. You don't want those to bind up. ahead and tighten that down. Want to go ahead and connect your connector right here. You can tuck that wire up like that. Install your cross brace here. Just tighten these down. Now from up top, go ahead and grab that heat shield and want to go ahead and manipulate that up and over on top of the manifold. And once you have that in place, want to go ahead and start all 4 of those bolts by hand, and then we'll snug them down. Now that we have all 4 of the bolts installed on our heat shield, want to go ahead and tighten those down. You want to make sure those are pretty snug. Reconnect your O2 sensor harness. I'm going to plug that in. Push it until it locks in and tug it, make sure it's locked in, and then re-secure that connector or the re-secure that harness on the back side here on the engine. I want to take our air intake piece here. I'm going to kind of shuffle this off over to the side. Take our air box. We have our rubber grommet here. I want to go ahead and press that in over here. We have the other grommet here. We'll slide that into place. And we drop our air box down and in. On the bottom, there's 2 plastic posts. And then there's one on the back side that goes into the back firewall area. So we want to drop this down inside. And when we do it as well, we want to go ahead and get that air intake tube attached to the throttle body. So. Work this down and into place. And that other intake tube, we have to manipulate that around. Gotta tuck that up because that's going to fit into the hole on the side of your air box. Put those 2 plastic pegs down on the bottom. Put the hose onto your throttle body. Work that in. Then you have this component here. We're going to work into this. Install our intake tube here. Work that into the air box. There it is. Pop that together here. Let's go ahead and tighten down these 2 clamps right here. Once that is snug, just give it a little bit more. And do the same here. You want that to be snug. Don't want to over tighten it, but make sure that it's snug. Bring up your mass airflow sensor harness here. Reconnect that. Snap that into place. Take your battery tray, and it should be listed with the FR with an arrow facing towards the front. Go ahead and drop that down inside. Once we have the battery tray in, go ahead and drop the battery in. Go ahead and install your hold down clamp here. Once you get that bolt started, I'm going to go ahead, make sure that battery is lined up and snug down that bolt. Once that bolt bottoms out, just give it a little bit more. We don't want to damage the battery yet. We want to make sure that battery is not going to jump around at all. Snug down that battery terminal. And go ahead and install the ground terminal. We'll do the same here. Now that your battery is all hooked up, I want to go ahead and hop into the vehicle, start it up, check for any leaks. If everything is nice and quiet, you're good to go.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.